it appears to me that there are people that are cynically going out and raising money on the idea that we should be talking about our problems all the time. And so that makes me really uncomfortable about the mental health conversation going on in the public today.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, that was a big barrier to me getting started because I didn't want to be one of those people. I didn't want to be someone who, like you say, is profiting off of their own misfortune.
I'm Miriam Hoffman, a full-time college student living in Carbondale, Illinois, and you're listening to the Vance Crowe podcast.
Jason Meadows, welcome to the podcast.
Vance, thanks for having me, man. I am grateful to be here. It's an honor to be here sharing a screen with you.
There's not very many ag podcasts I listen to. It's I have a few that are my friends or people that I know, but because I'm not in agriculture, I don't have the same pull for it. So I try and listen to things way far away from agriculture. But every once in a while, I'll cruise in on one of yours, and I just heard one you did with Jared McDaniel, and I think you have an interesting way of talking about agriculture. So I thought I'd have you on and talk about issues that are really big inside of the agriculture community. So I'm totally comfortable with this being inside baseball because I feel like, neither of us are farmers per se, but we're in the ag world. Or I guess I think you're not a farmer. I know you're a veterinarian. So anyway, why don't you introduce yourself?
Actually, I'm a pharmacist.
Pharmacist, that's right.
Pharmacist, but I also run cattle operation too. So, I've got a lot of things going on. I've got a lot of different perspectives into it. So, but yeah, my podcast started, it's a little over a year old, and I went to college. I went to St. Louis College of Pharmacy, and I graduated there in 2008. And I came back home, but I always had this love of agriculture. My dad ran a cow-calf operation, owned the local livestock market. And so I bought my first set of cows while I was in college. So they helped finance my way through college, helped me pay my rent and all those things. It was a really big blessing to my life. But when I was through college and through even the first, I guess probably 10 years that I was out of pharmacy school, I wanted to find a way where I could combine those two worlds of healthcare and agriculture. And starting the podcast, it was a way for me to kind of combine those two worlds. And it's been a really interesting experience trying to talk. I started out a lot more of a mental health side of things, but it's evolving more into talking about just general health and well-being and trying to put that in a box that is easy for folks in agriculture to digest. I think it's, it sounds like it's simple, but it's really easier said than done.
So, tell me about pharmacy school. Of all the things that you could study in the whole world, why was that the thing that you were drawn to?
So my brother-in-law actually owned a pharmacy when I was growing up. I worked there. It's funny you say veterinarian because that is what I was going to do. That's what I was going to do my entire life. From the time I think I was third grade until the time I was a junior in high school, I was going to be a veterinarian. Large animal vet, just because I loved animals. My dad had farmed. Had cows. We had horses too. And I just loved working with animals. But there was this one day, I was a junior in high school. We had to do a cesarean C-section on a cow with the vet out there. And it was probably 6 inches of snow, just freezing cold, probably January, middle of January, just awful weather. You know how Missouri weather is, just terrible. And the vet said to me something, and I don't think he said it on purpose as far as to convince me of anything, because he knew I was going to go to vet school. He's like, man, what I wouldn't give to be in a warm office today. And I was like, that was it. That was the day I quit going to vet school. And so from that point on, I got to talking to my brother-in-law. I started working with him, delivering medicine in town. we lived in I lived outside a small town in Cuba, Missouri, and that's where the pharmacy was. And I worked there delivering medicine, then working the counter, just helping him out, and kind of just felt right going into school like that. And I graduated high school in 2002, and that's when I started the fall of 2002, graduated 2008. It's a really great place to be if you want to help somebody in healthcare, but not have the demand of school like it would take to be an MD or something. But it's also a prestigious degree too. So it was something I felt like I could make a good living, but not be quite as married to it as I would if I were to be a doctor.
And so are you the guy that's with like a lab coat and you're in the back of like a CVS or a Walgreens and you're dispensing medication that way?
That's basically my job. I do it a little bit differently. I work in a regional hospital. I work in the outpatient pharmacy of a regional hospital, but we are for employees only of the health system, which doesn't sound like a lot, but we have roughly 2,000 employees who we service them, the employees and their families. So I manage that. That's my full-time job, is I manage that pharmacy. And I've been there, for the past 12 years.
So why then like the connection when you jumped into the ag space and you start doing mental health? It's surprising to me that it wasn't pharmaceutical health or something like that.
So I think it was because I had struggled myself. And I'll tell a little story here of why the podcast started. And it was July of 2019. And up until this point, I had struggled mightily with anxiety, just not able to get my stress under control, having a lot of stress, just so many things, not really work related, but family issues, farm issues, funny enough, even at times marriage issues. And it really took a toll on me for a long time, but I was able to get a handle on it. I was able to get better with it. And something happened in July 2019. Carrie, my wife, and I were at a conference in Dallas, and I'll back up just here for a second. We were still in our hay season. My dad still farms a bunch of acres, runs a lot of cattle, and we were helping him out. My son and I were helping. He was 14 at the time, and Carrie and I decided to take this trip to Dallas, even though the hay season wasn't done. And I told Levi, my oldest son, that, it's kind of up to him and Grandpa to kind of get things done while we're gone. I didn't expect anything like this to happen, but I get a call when I'm in Dallas at a hotel room, and Levi tells me that the hay baler's on fire. A bearing had burnt up in the bearing, and it's on fire and 100 miles away from home. I mean, it's just scary. And I dealt with the situation. I talked to Levi through it, and I think normally the old me would have went back there and like tried to drive back home and just ruined this whole time that Carrie and I had away. And don't get me wrong, it was definitely a big thing that happened, but I kind of was able to talk to him on the phone, realized that everything was okay and there was no point in me going back. And I had that kind of moment of self-reflection there and realized that I had helped myself so much and gotten to this point. And if this would have happened even a year or two earlier, then it would have been a total mess. And I would have made a bad situation even worse with how I would have reacted to it. And I realized that I've helped myself, realized I'd gotten better. And I wanted to be able to share that with people like me who are involved in agriculture. I mean, to a certain degree. Obviously, I'm not as involved as a lot of people are, but I wanted to give back. I wanted to help people to have some faith in themselves, to know that they can get better, right? And I think the podcast was something that just I felt could reach the most amount of people, and it just kind of took off from there.
What did you learn to be able to make that change from the person that would have driven back in the middle of the night to the person that was able to say, I've done what I can from here and we're going to just keep moving forward?
I think it was a lot of just self-reflection, self-awareness. I'm such a fixer, people-pleasing type person. Are you familiar with the Enneagram, Vance?
A little bit. I've heard people talking about this, but I don't know very much about it.
You should really try it. You should really take the test, because it really helps.
I've definitely
you.
taken the test. I just like the answers don't resonate with me enough for me to remember them.
Okay, so I'm an Enneagram type 3. Like, if you read the type 3, it's like a life story of me, and it's an achiever, but it's also a people pleasing person. So I think the people pleaser in me would have wanted to be back there, and if it wasn't only for just appearance's sake, or to make someone else feel better about me being there. And not even people that mattered, and people, I'm talking about neighbors, people who are observing the situation from the outside in, and becoming really self-aware with myself, understanding like some of my motivations behind these things, my like instincts, my gut feelings, and being able to push back against those and resist those a little bit. Understanding what was really important, I think, is the difference of Jason 3 years ago and Jason now.
Wow. I mean, that's that level of self-awareness is one that is not only difficult to come to realize of yourself, but then to be able to talk about it as openly, because that's a big hurdle to overcome, right? That's the poser motif. That's the person that's trying to be something they're not necessarily, and you just laid it out bare there.
Yeah, it was really ugly for me for a couple of, probably about a month of trying to start telling that story, and it made me feel just, when you grow up, and maybe you're wanting to touch on this a little bit, when you grow up, and not just in agriculture, but I think in the society that we have grown up with, rurally, Midwest, you have this kind of sense of what a man is supposed to be, right? And it's supposed to be someone who doesn't show their feelings and doesn't talk about them and buries them deep down, and just deals with them in a way that we know now is unhealthy. And for me, it was dealing with it with alcohol and other things that were very unhealthy for me. And being able to break that mold a little bit, and being like, especially right around here, especially locally here, one of the first people out of the gate talking about that, especially, like I said, especially locally, that's scary. And you have to get really comfortable with yourself and really comfortable with your story really fast.
Yeah. And it's a weird thing, because if your mental health is the part of your identity, it's like a weird thing to be, right? Like, nobody wants to be labeled the schizophrenic, but at the same time, nobody wants to be labeled as the person that is bringing up their bullshit or their problems as somebody that to capitalize off of it, right? We all know those people on Facebook or whatever, where their problems are just kind of shoved in your face.
Yeah, and that was probably the part of it I struggled with the most, Vance. It is not wanting to be someone who is looking to profit off of their own misfortunes. And there's a fine line there. There really is. And because I get scared that it turns into a popularity contest sometimes, as far as sharing your story. And I don't want this to be misinterpreted, because I think it's really important for people to share their stories in regards to mental health. but we have to be, I think we have to be really careful as to, like I said, not make it be a popularity contest and, oh, I've struggled this much or someone else has struggled. We don't want it to be a one-up game. We want it to be a community where we share things, and it can kind of toe that line a little close sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with the open conversations about mental health. Because I definitely know what you're talking about wanting to be open with whether there was something that you had traumatic in your life that if you had only known other people went through this too, then that's like helping people. I definitely 100% believe in that. My wife and I couldn't get pregnant for a really long time, and we went through hell on that. And I want to tell people about it because I do not want other people to experience that without having known, hey, this can happen to you. But the flip side of that is, like you said, it appears to me that there are people that are cynically going out and raising money on the idea that we should be talking about our problems all the time. And so that makes me really uncomfortable about the mental health conversation going on in the public today.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, that was a big barrier to me getting started because I didn't want to be one of those people. I didn't want to be someone who, like you say, is profiting off of their own misfortune and trying to make a buck off of that. And I don't want to be that. That's for sure. And I think that people who really are reaching folks and really making a difference, they aren't that.
Yeah, I would say like your conversation with Jared McDaniel was one that was very, very interesting to me because it felt like the sharing that you guys talked about is what made me really interested in what you're doing. Is that you were sharing it as like a way to be like, yeah, this is the way that I understand the world. I'm a primate out here with all my vices and the things I want to get better at. And, this is the way that I've experienced bad things that have gone on. And then the other primate is able to say to him, like, yeah, I agree with that. That also, I see the same thing that you do, because shared understanding is like the foundation of what it is to be human. So there's definitely a space for people to be talking about, this is the way I dealt with anxiety and the problems in my life. I 100% think that you're feeling that.
Well, thanks. That's what I try to make it be. I try to make it be real conversations between real people. And, that's a good thing about agriculture when you're focusing on agriculture is, there's not a whole lot of room for a whole lot of BS. And people, for the most part, they can smell a bullshit artist really fast. And I try my hardest to never be one of those because I want to be real. I take pride in the fact that my podcast, when you hear me talk on my podcast, that's what it's like talking to me in real life. I mean, that is exactly, I make it as real and just like a normal conversation I would have with someone. I fail at that sometimes, but I try my hardest to make it like that.
Oh, there's no doubt. When you're doing a podcast, one of the biggest challenges is you have to have some level of persona to be able to stand in front of, the black mirror in front of you and talk directly to it. But yet you can do your best to have a conversation that maybe is worthwhile to have a snapshot. I'm always trying to think of, what is the most interesting thing that we would be glad that we both shared? And there's a subject that a lot of people don't like talking about, but I think from the faith that you have, that probably would be something that'd be really interesting, not only for you to talk about, but for people to hear, which is that you're a member of the Mormon Church, the LDS. And
Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We've kind of shifted away from using the first two terms just because we don't want to leave. And I'm not trying to.
No, this is great. I don't know anything at all about it.
So,
go ahead.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought this up because I don't get to talk about this very much. And we have a president of our church. His name's Russell M. Nelson, and he wanted to not be any doubt what the focus of our church was, and that focus being Jesus Christ. And when you use the terms LDS, Latter-day Saint, Mormon, those terms there was nothing necessarily wrong with them, but they didn't identify what the sole focus of our church was, and that was Jesus Christ. And that's when was it? A couple of years ago, it doesn't matter, 2018 I think it was, where they really pushed forward trying to change what we call it.
And so what is the official title then?
Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the biggest problem with that for me is that it's a mouthful. It's a lot to say. And Mormon, LDS, Latter-day Saint, those things are a lot easier to say. But the problem that comes with those is you leave what the sole focus of the church is.
So are you offended if somebody refers to it as LDS or Mormon?
No. Not at all. No, because for the most part, most people, that's how they know it. And I'm not offended. Vance, I'm virtually unoffendable. I just am by my nature. But I'm not offended, but I am also not shy to correct either.
So I've been thinking a lot about community and how from my perspective, one of the biggest reasons that we're in the amount of social strife that we're in right now, which I think then equates to existential dread, what's going to happen? Those other guys are out to get me. They're going to take something from me. I think a huge component of that comes from the fact that people are not in community. They are not finding a group of people that have the same value set that they do, but then coming from different walks of life. Because when you have that, then you have to collide with those people at like church, for example. Mm-hmm. And you have to stand next to somebody that you don't agree with the way he thinks an election should run, or how your neighborhood has some regulation that he likes and you don't like. Those things you're going to just encounter. But because you have to see that guy next week, you have to figure out a way to talk to him. And occasionally he's going to have an idea that you didn't have that's going to influence you for the better. And we don't have that anymore in almost any domain except for churches in this country.
You're right. And, I'll take it even a step further. And we talk about, a big problem. Now, again, it's a great thing. I'm going to talk about social media, and it's a good thing. Social media is a good thing to have because, let's face it, you and I may have never connected if it wasn't for social media. So many people that I've talked to on the podcast, it would have been virtually impossible for us to, not impossible, but much, much harder. But the problem with social media is you can say anything without fear of retribution. Some of the things that you used to be able, if you would say the same thing that people are saying online to one another, it would likely end up in an altercation. It would end up with someone getting punched in the mouth. And when you remove that fear of retribution, that fear of an altercation, then people will just say whatever. And it's like you said, there's no community anymore. There's no way for people to face that in the long term, because they're not going to go see that person that they lashed out on at the grocery store, at church, or something like that. And social media is a blessing and a curse, and we have to be very careful with how we use it.
I think that that the fact that there is no retribution, right, that person can just sit there and pop off, means that you are so much more vulnerable to bias and self-censorship and all the behaviors that are going to warp the way that you think, because it warps what you say. And, anytime you're writing down something that you're really thinking hard, like, how's this person going to interpret it, and that person, and is this going to score points on this other person? You're messing around with what the truth actually is. And you're warping your words, and you're changing the way that you perceive what it is that what you really think. because you're trying to please these other people. And then you're surrounding yourself with other people that think similar to you with that warped level of thinking, whether that's what they actually think or that's also what they think the crowd needs to hear or wants to hear. And it's not good.
No, it's we put so you just kind of illustrated what it's like to try and navigate that whole landscape there, and you put so much energy into all these different aspects of what you're trying to say, when used to it was just an interaction between two human beings, and it was just left at that. And I don't we are social media technology is advancing and evolving much faster than our human brains are able to compute it. I mean, that's the way I feel anyway. I don't think that we are able to keep up with how fast it's moving.
Yeah, I mean, I think the amount of information that we're trying to track at any given time is completely overwhelming, and that's likely the reason the way it's structured the way that it is. I was just writing a talk, and one of the pieces of information I wanted to put in there is that human beings can only hold 7 discrete things in their minds, plus or minus 2. So some people can hold 9 things in their mind, some people can hold 5 things. But for the most part, it's you can hold 7 things in your working memory at any given time. So if you go to make a decision on what house are we going to buy, and you're thinking about 3 different things, the way the tile looks, how great the bathroom is, and the red front door, then you only have 4 more things that you can be thinking about at that time. Because once you go over 7, you have anxiety. And I think we're overloaded with how many things we think we're supposed to know about what's going on, and it's taking up this working memory, and it's overloading our anxiety systems.
I'm as guilty as that as anyone, trying to figure out, because I want to be in the know on things, and I want to be caught up in everything, but it's like, I've never heard that. I'm glad that you shared that with me, because that's a really, it kind of puts into perspective how many things you can really have your attention on. And if it's 7 things, I mean, gosh, how many things how much, it really helps you understand what's important, what you want to give that space to. Is it what someone who may or may not be a real person said to me on Twitter? Is that something you want to put on in the filling up one of those 7 compartments? Or are you would you rather replace that with something that has more long lasting and important consequences?
Well, man, we did this Sober October, and in the Articulate Ventures Network, and one of the things that I gave up was Twitter. And I had no idea how hard that was going to be to do. I really did not realize just how much of an electronic addiction I had built. But then on top of that, it did exactly what you're describing. I was paying attention to having arguments with people that were hundreds of miles away from me, that was a throwaway comment, or they didn't really take the time to think about what I said. And I am wasting my very precious attention on that when I have a brand new baby. And as soon as I made that realization, I was like, what an expensive thing to waste your attention on Twitter.
I had an experience on Twitter long ago, way before there was an Ag State of Mind Twitter. It was just my own personal Twitter, and I had made a comment towards a ESPN personality. I don't remember what it was, Vance. I don't remember what I said, but I got so much hate coming into me, retweets and comments, and I remember how much just of my own personal bandwidth that took up, and I was distraught by that. And this was probably 6 or 7 years ago, when Twitter was a lot younger than it is now, and I was a lot younger, and I remember how that made me feel. And after it was all kind of done, I deleted my Twitter account after that. I mean, that was how bad it affected me. And then I just kind of realized how big of a waste of time for me to worry about what a complete stranger would think. I think something totally not correct about me. And I really was Twitter. I was really able to learn early on the value or devalue a lot of the interactions I have on there.
So, going back to the Mormon and the community there,
Sure.
So tell me about the community that you have there. How often do you get together with people from your church? How often do you see people? How does all that community build out?
So it normally, right? We get together with the church obviously once a week, and then our kids go to youth activities every Wednesday. And my wife is involved with that. I'm not. I'm more involved with there's a certain structure within the church where there are people who are in charge of young men, young women. That's our like 12 to 18-year-olds. There's people who are in charge of like the primary, which is everyone younger than 12. And then there's people in charge of, I don't want to say in charge, but has stewardship over the adult males and then the adult women too. So there's various activities on a normal time that are always planned throughout the year, throughout the month, and we kind of take turns as organizations who's doing what each month. And we'll have like a big church get together once a month where it's at like whether it be like a hog roast at a brother's house or we used to always have like a trunk or treat for for the kids that come in. I didn't grow up in the church, Vance. My wife was a member of the church, and when we got married, that was something that I made the choice to do, is join her in that.
Whoa, that is a big one. That's a
believe
big
me,
change.
man. If you would have known me 12 years ago, when I graduated college, and know me today, it would be like talking. I don't want to say that because I don't think my personality has changed, but my habits and the things that I do, it is totally different. It's a totally different person. So, I mean, that was a huge challenge for me.
So let's talk about one of the things would be being a young guy doing what you want, and then you join the church, and now you have groups that you go to where there's a steward that like guides you. Is that Bible study? What does that look like?
It's a lot less formal than you would think. It's the people in the church are the nicest people on earth. They are at least where I go to church, they are people who they were you would just be friends with them. And it was always funny because I didn't know who were members of the church, because I worked at the hospital in Rolla for probably almost a year before I started to go into church here. And I was very surprised at the people who were members of the church that I knew working at the hospital. And that's comforting to me because, so I'll back up a little bit. When I was in youth group in church growing up at the church I grew up going to, we would have like my youth pastor would be very anti-Mormon. He would talk about things in the Mormon church and like how it was almost akin to devil worship and this sort of thing. And like, so
that's wild. I mean, the reputation that I had when I was growing up, and it didn't break in my mind until I met a bunch of Mormons. They were nice people, but they were in a cult. That's what we were told.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't until I went on my first trip to a Utah Farm Bureau that I meet a bunch of, I don't remember the full name of the church, but the Mormons.
Sure. That's fine. You can use that. You won't offend me one bit, Vance. You can use that because it's easier.
They were exceptionally nice and candid to the point of, heartwarming. And so for me, I was like, this is an interesting group of people. I don't know what other people accuse you of, but every time I've interacted with your people, they've been very good to me.
Yeah. And that was, so on our second date, Carrie and I were sitting across from one another eating, and I don't know why she didn't tell me on the first date. Maybe she was scared to, I don't know, but we were sitting across from one another eating, and we started talking about church, and I asked, "Oh, so do you go to church?" We kind of exchanged stories like you would. And I said, "Oh, what church do you go to?" And she said, "LDS Church." And I didn't know what that meant. And I said, oh, what's that? And she said, Mormon. And she said, I stopped mid bite with a fork full of food and just stared at her for a couple of seconds. And because I'd had such a negative view of that group of people, and it was solely because of a youth pastor that I had, and it just had left this really bad taste in my mouth. So I was very skeptical going in, and then when my wife and when I started going to church with her, so the church is separated into it's separated. It has a very neat flow chart like organization as to who goes to church where, and it's by geography. So my wife lived in Dixon, Missouri, which would have put her in a different church. We call them wards. She went to church in St. Robert, which was a military heavy ward. So that was my first impression, were people of the military. Well, it was a little bit different, right? It wasn't, how military people can, when you are not a military person, it can almost make you feel like an outsider. So that was like my first impression of the church, or 1B, I guess we'll call it. But then when I came to church where I go now, which is in Rolla, the warmth and the greeting that I had, the friends that I made, who are still some of my best friends to this day, it turned me around really fast.
So when you get in there and you start hearing what the Mormons believe, can you see the things that the person that was scaring you about the Mormons, can you see where the kernel of the story grew from into something wild and nebulous, or was it just completely fabricated?
No, I don't see that at all. And I have no idea where that would come from. I have no idea why anyone would talk bad about these people. It's incredible to me, because to me, the church represents everything that is good and pure about being an American. I mean, community, taking care of your brother, a sense of pride, a sense of hard work. The real true meaning and the true foundation of the church is it's great because it's a uniquely American church. I mean, it's spread to all corners of the world now, but it was one of the first purely American religions.
I never really thought about it. The Mormon church version of the Pope, it would exist in the United States. The center of power would be the United States. I'd never even crossed my mind.
Yeah. I mean, there's a hierarchy that passes down, much like you would think of with the Pope or a head of another church. I'm not sure how it is in other religions, but there's a definite hierarchy there.
So what's the difference between the Holy Scriptures that you were using before and that are now considered holy in this version, in this church?
There's just extra. Okay. So if you went to church.
Oh man, Revelation says you're not supposed to do that, man.
So I know. And that was a big thing for me, Vance. That was a big problem I had. And it's hard for me to explain because I am very new to the church relatively. I think it was 2010 when I was baptized. So, I mean, 10 years. It's just been 10 years. So I'm still learning. So the way I understand it is there was nothing that was necessarily. So when Revelation is speaking about the Holy Bible, and the Holy Bible is the collection of the New Testament and of the Old Testament, and that is closed. There is nothing that can be added to the scriptures of the Old Testament and the New Testament. But the Book of Mormon is something separate. It's something, it's and it says that in the title page. In everything that you read or is discussed about the Book of Mormon, it's another testament of Jesus Christ. So it's not adding anything to the original scriptures. It's something separate. So what the Book of Mormon is the story of Jesus coming to the Americas after his death and resurrection in the Holy Land. So it starts out with a family who immigrated from Jerusalem to the Americas, made the trek over here. And there's someone way more qualified to talk about it than me, but this is
this is a great primer, man. I know nothing at all about this.
Good, because I don't know if I've ever explained it in real detail to anyone who didn't understand it because of how my relative infancy in the church. And so this, it was the family of Lehi. Lehi was the father. There was this group of brothers, and Nephi was kind of their leader. But he had these two older brothers who were kind of jerks to him all the way through the thing. And that was a big tug and pull through the time of them getting over here. And then they finally get over here. And then they break off into these two kind of tribes. And they're the Nephites and the Nephites and the Lamanites. Laman was one of Nephi's kind of jerk-faced brothers, right? And they, throughout the Book of Mormon, there's struggle and strife between the Nephites and the Lamanites, and it kind of goes in. That just kind of goes on through almost in forever until. And I honestly, Vance, and I'm kind of showing what I don't know here. I'm not really sure where it goes from there because I'm still learning, right? I mean, and I'm comfortable admitting that, and it's proof that there's room for everyone in that church if you want to be there. Because I know a lot more now, but I still have a lot more to learn. I mean, my wife.
I think if you asked a person, not all certainly, but many people that are a part of the Christian faith, if you ask them, tell me any of the, how many people in the Bible can you name? And in what you can name, what all did they do? And if it wasn't turned into a musical or a Charlton Heston movie, they have very limited understanding of what that is. And I think that's part of religion becoming a read-only culture, or one that is passed down to your families. And that's something I think the Mormons are doing really well in this modern age. They've found a way to perpetuate their ideas to the next generation, so that more people have heard about it the next year than less, right? It's a growing place where there's people that are learning it. They're having it a part of their everyday life when they eat, when they spend time with their family, the activities that they do. And I think many of the other religions have not done that. And I think in a lot of ways, that's been the thing that keeps you resilient and the thing that makes a lot of other faiths becoming kind of fragile or brittle right now.
Yeah, we do a really, really good job of that. And, we see the president of our church as the prophet, as a prophet who has a direct kind of dialogue with God. And so last year, I'm just making sure I have this right. Yes, 2019, we instituted a new program where it was a much more home-centered. So we used to go to church for 3 hours on Sunday. That's one of the biggest things that drives people away, I think, is spending 3 hours on Sunday at church. So we lessened that by an hour, but we emphasized, or our church leaders emphasized, the importance of having study at home, taking the time as parents to share the lesson. They had this whole manual set out, and the lessons that you were supposed to share with your children each night and share as a family each night. And we stuck to that. We were very, and I'd like to take more credit for it than I actually deserve. Carrie was like so crucial in this and making sure we stuck to this every night. And we really got in this groove of home-centered church, really making sure we talk about church things at night and it may be for just 5 or 10 minutes, but we have a conversation about the scriptures, about the lessons. And then fast forward 14, 15 months and COVID happened and everything shut down. There was no church to be had.
That's some pretty forward thinking stuff then.
I was in a meeting. I was a member of the Sunday school presidency. A Sunday school is another part of the hierarchy or the organization of the church. And I was at this meeting with some area leaders, and I remember the areas are called stakes. A stake is so many so a ward. I'm just going to do a little bit of inside baseball here on that. A ward is a collection of so many people in a geographic area. And that's the people you go to church with every Sunday. So many wards make up a stake, and a stake is kind of like your area. A stake is so many wards, which are comprised of so many people, and a stake can be, our stake right now goes from Cuba, where I live, and goes down to over to Lake of the Ozarks, a fairly good sized area. But if you were talking about a stake in Utah, it's city blocks wide. Just because of it depends on the concentration of church members in a given area. So we were at this conference, this stake conference is what it was called. And he was speaking to us, where there's someone who's the leader of the stake called the stake president. And he was speaking to us, and he said, I would like to know, because we view the prophet as someone as the watchman on the tower. Someone who is looking out ahead and wanting to and seeing what we can't see, right? And he sees what's coming, but it's his job to prepare all of us for that. And I remember our stake president saying, I wish I knew what he saw, because it's something big. And I mean, obviously this is what he saw. He saw what the world was coming to, what the pandemic, what the lockdowns were going to be. And I feel like the church has stayed as strong as ever, where I don't think you can say that about a lot of faiths, a lot of churches.
I mean, 100% you can't say that. I think there are going to be a lot of people that in the nihilistic present that we're in, where things feel like a zero-sum game, and that they don't have any friends and they don't have any connections and they can't find anybody that thinks like they do. Well, that's going to be because they were so inundated with the idea that their identity is driven from what makes them separate from other people, as opposed to a significant portion of your identity is about how you interact and how you engage with other people. Mm-hmm. And I think when that realization comes, we're going to see different groups pop up, and some of them will be oriented towards the good, and some of them will be oriented towards causing suffering with other people. But that I think a lot of people are going to try and find church because it'll feel comfortable for them. But right now, that's not happening.
Yeah, and we just started going back to church a couple of weeks ago. Well, as a church we did. I've had 2 different kids on quarantine from school the last 2 Sundays, so we haven't been there for that. But hopefully we get to go back for the first time with the church as a whole this Sunday.
What are we going to do with this quarantining thing? Because right now it's at least what I've seen, people get notification, and then every person they came in contact with now has to be out for 7 days until they don't have symptoms, or 14 days. And it seems like a matter of mathematics that eventually everyone will get pinged by this. I don't know. It seems like
it's It's a public health nightmare, Vance. It's something that I don't understand where they're coming up with these things. And I'll share something with you, and something someone else shared with me, in that so take my son, for example. He sat next to a girl in school. They're in fourth grade. He sat next to a girl who tested positive. Him and I can't remember, but the people who were very close to her in class, they were all sent home on quarantine. Not one of those in our school who have been sent home have come back with a positive test. Right? I mean, I don't get it. I don't understand. And
why we're so careful with children, right? Like, we're treating this as though all ages get this and are harmed by this in the exact same way. And that's just not true. Like,
it's not true at all. I mean, I don't want to speak in absolutes here, but I mean, it's virtually unheard of for a child without, comorbidities or complicating factors to die of this. Even to be, I mean, the vast majority of them are asymptomatic. I mean, the kids will test positive and they won't have as much as a runny nose. I mean, they'll say that you feel fine. And it's incredible that we're kind of hijacking our immunity with this stuff. I mean, to me, that's how we defeated diseases and now I believe in vaccines. I think vaccines are something that have made modern medicine and made humanity better. But for a long time, that's how we got immune to anything, was by being exposed to it. And basically that's what a vaccine is, just in a watered down way.
Yeah, and we had the whole summer to have had people really engage with one another. Like, we know it's going to be there, but everybody's going to be full of vitamin D. Summertime, you're going to get some more sleep. You're not going to be out and about. We'll get it. We'll have some people get it. It'll spread around. But we didn't do that. We kept everybody indoors. And so now they're going to go into fall and winter and be way more lax, because we've kept it at red alert, at top notch, fear factor. And then we're inside, and it's people are going to be taking off their masks and spending more time with one another. I don't know. It just seems like we've backed ourselves into a corner here.
Right. Carrie and I were talking just this evening, and we have we're 2 weeks away from Thanksgiving, and I believe that it's a legitimate concern for folks like my parents, who my dad is 84, has COPD, isn't in very good health. My mom's is 80, but she's in better health, but she's still 80. Those are the people who I really am concerned for. I mean, this virus poses a real threat for them. And I feel like we could have done such a better job kind of spreading it around to people who would not be affected by it, and kind of let it pass through. And now, like you say, it's, it gets dark at 5 o'clock. It's getting colder now. We're being indoors way more. I just feel like there was some real oversight here.
So, you're around a lot of heavy medications, right? And you were talking about things like anxiety before. What do you think about people using medicine or chemicals to be controlling their mental health issues?
So I obviously think that there's a place for that. That's part of what pays my mortgage, right? Is I dispense medicine to people. So I do believe in it. I do believe there's a place for it. My problem is that's the first place people go to. You go to a primary care provider and you talk to them, you say, I've had all this stress. I'm yelling at my wife all the time, I'm being a jerk to my kids. I can't seem to cope anymore. So, okay, well, how about we try some Zoloft here? That I know that's helped a lot of other people. That should try that for about 6 weeks and see if you show a difference. And you go back in 6 weeks and you're like, I'm probably better. And I said, well, we put you only on 50 milligrams. Let's try 100 milligrams. And then you go, it's just this vicious cycle where you don't think it's working anymore. Like, well, okay, well, let's try some Effexor instead. And it's just, you get it's approached way to the ease of which we can prescribe medications for these disorders I feel like we're way too trigger happy on it. By we, I meant I shouldn't say we. Doctors are, healthcare providers are.
And so a big one that came up that kind of hit everybody's news radars that was paying attention was the Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist that often talks to people about, cleaning up their room, taking responsibility for themselves, pushing themselves forward. He had some depression issues and took some benzodiazepines and then developed a hardcore addiction to them and said he couldn't get off them. So he was like over in Russia. What are benzodiazepines?
They're your Xanax, your Valium, Ativan. They're a mild hypnotic, and they are a classification 4 by the DEA as far as addiction potential. So there's a significant level of addiction possibility with them, and addiction can happen with these medications within a few doses. And the place benzodiazepines are supposed to play in anxiety, depression are you're supposed to take them for a month and then wean off of them for while let me back up here. The reason that you have that benzodiazepine taper is a lot of the SSRIs, like your Zolofts, your Prozacs, even your Effexors, they take like 6 weeks to reach their steady state. They're
like enough dose being in there with enough half-life that it actually impacts you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And they take about 6 weeks. And so the benzos are supposed to be prescribed for like 4 weeks and then gradually tapered off. But people aren't doing that. And like I said earlier, I mean, there's the potential for abuse only within or addiction only within a few doses. And they're way overprescribed. And there
what
are
they
people
supposed to be doing? Why does somebody get a benzodiazepine prescribed to them?
So they're a calming agent. They work on, I can't for the life of me think of the system they work on. My pharmacology teacher is going to come back and strangle me for this, but they what they do is they provide a calming effect to someone who is, people will call them a nerve pill. You hear somebody saw that, a little old lady come to the pharmacy, I need my nerve pill. That's generally a Xanax or a Valium or something like that. And they kind of will mellow a person out. They will make them not so irritable, not so really not so anxious.
Anxious but then eventually when they want to get off of them, what is the addiction response? What does it feel like?
It's like there's respiratory issues, there's like psychological things, there's it's almost like a rebound effect. Like it's worse than the anxiety was that you were treating, right? It affects everyone differently, but there's, you can have you can have tachycardia, increased heart rate, all these things that are just the body needing that. It's like you give your car, premium gasoline. This is probably a bad example, but you just, you take that away from it all of a sudden. Well, it's not going to perform at the level that it's supposed to. And you're putting chemicals in your body and you're maintaining a homeostasis, your body's become used to that. Then you take those chemicals away, it's not doesn't have the right chemicals in it to function properly or how it's been used to functioning.
Anxiety, I was reading
that was kind of muddy. I'm sorry. But.
No, I mean, I get it. I mean, what it makes me think of is that anxiety is one of those things. If you go read Carl Jung and what he talks about with anxiety, he says the one good thing about anxiety is that it is referring to something going on in the present. You don't have to go dig around in somebody's past about some problems they had with their parents or something they haven't gotten over since they were a child. That feeling of anxiety is something that their brain is trying to tell them, you need to pay attention to this, or you need to let this go, or you need to move past this. And so the concept of medicating that is like, I'm sure there are circumstances where they're needed. I've never had to deal with the depths of needing to go in the medical direction, but it also is a nihilistic path, because it's just saying like, hey, I don't know how to figure out what this problem is, and I'm gonna take the nap for a while, and hopefully I wake up from the nap and I'm not in more pain than I was when I started.
So, man, I heard this recently from someone. It was Dr. John Deloney. He's actually a mental health specialist with Dave Ramsey, with Ramsey Solutions. I was listening to him this week, and he made the really great point in that anxiety in itself isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. It's a tool because it helps you know that there is something wrong. There's a negative or something you perceive as a negative stimulus, and that's your reaction to that. That it's like a conditioning thing, an instinctual thing to, you've got
absolutely.
You've got a big test coming up. You've got a big presentation at work. I mean,
you're not dealing with a problem, and you're ignoring it, and you're trying to be like, I'm just going to keep walking past that, and hopefully it won't be here when I get back.
So there's the problem, Vance. The problem is people the anxiety is there, but we mask it. And the problem is we aren't doing enough to cope with it. We need to get better at actually addressing whatever the problems are coming our way. We need to get better at understanding that this thing isn't going, if we push it away, it's not going to go away. Someone described it to me one time as like, say there's this room in your house and there's a light bulb out. You've got to change that light bulb. But you keep ignoring it. And what happens when you keep ignoring it? It keeps nagging at you even more and more and more. What's the only solution to that problem? Go put a new light bulb in, and that's the way we have to treat anxiety. That's the way we have to treat these things. We have to address them. We can't ignore them. And I think so many people just want to ignore them and want to just think that it's going to go away when it's not really going to go away. We just have to find a better way of coping with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the challenge that I have with the mantras that seem to go around about empathy with helping somebody get through their problems, when the focus is on, you have to really know where they're coming from, because I think you should have compassion for people. I think you should be like, hey, it would be awful to have those issues. But anything other than helping get them on their feet so that they can move towards the solution that they themselves want to find, that they have chosen that they're going to get up and solve, I think anything else it's not necessarily helping. I don't think it's good to go to people and say you're great the way that you are, because if they're feeling anxiety, they're like, well, then I feel anxiety. What am I supposed to just stop feeling this?
Yeah, no, I mean, you have to. And that's been my thing all along, is recognize the problems, but don't leave without solutions. There's solutions, and there's solutions that, and I think the problem is the solution, and it's just like with exercise. It's just with like getting healthier. The quick fixes are always a lot faster and seem a lot better than the actual real hard work that it takes to actually get better.
What do you do to choose what area you're working on next? I know you're in the middle of running right now, but how do you choose what your next big thing is?
Man, I do a lot of compartmentalization, Vance. That's, I was talking to someone on a podcast just this past week about this, and it's all about giving the appropriate thing, the appropriate attention at the appropriate time. And, I've got a lot of things going on. I've got a job, I've got a wife and 4 kids. I've got, a pretty significant size farm to take care of, and I've got this podcast thing too. And I'm trying to do, like you mentioned, I'm trying to take care of my health and try to take care of my body and exercise and making sure I'm taking care of my own needs too. And my biggest thing is writing things out in advance. And we talk about this in the AVN a lot about how important journaling is. And journaling has been my savior as far as being able to get to the next big thing. That's been what has really elevated my goal status. And
how do you write in your journal? What do you think about?
So I think about, like, my biggest thing is I really focus, especially early in the morning, I focus on gratitude, because I think it's been studied that gratitude, if you start your day with any sort of gratitude, then you are just setting yourself up for success. And I'm living proof of that. I'll skip a day of journaling where I don't go through my daily gratitudes, and I feel like shit because I didn't start with that. And it's just
well, and I think people could look at that cynically and be like, oh, well, you want to do gratitude so that good things happen to you. But what you don't realize is, if you're grateful for what you have, you can feel a sense of satisfaction. And if you don't feel grateful for what you have, you will never be satisfied.
Right. Yeah.
And so, like, if it is one of those things that if you can get yourself to sit down and be like, hey, I'm actually going to take the time to do this, it's a conversation with that inner daemon, that inner voice that is good and has a calming effect on everybody.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And having that conversation, like, with yourself, and being really, like, intentional with the things that you're grateful for, then you can kind of move on to the things. And my big things is goals, and having, just for example, I'm wanting to, I have a line of credit for my cattle loan that I'm really focusing on paying down right now. And that's in my journal, that's my most effective goal, or my most impactful goal. And really right now, that's where all of my attention is being thrown to at this moment. And if when that gets done, then it's going to be something else. And just always having something that I'm working towards really keeps me going, and it keeps me way ahead of my demons.
And tell me about your demons. What do you mean? Which ones?
So I am a victim of comparison. I didn't share this with you yet, but I think it's significant. I am the youngest of 5 kids, and I have been, like, perpetually comparing myself to my older brothers, especially who are very successful. One's a Farm Bureau agent. One is he's a civil engineer. He owns his own civil engineering firm, and comparing myself with them has been like my ultimate vice for the most of my adult life, just trying to see how I stacked up to them at a certain point in my life, and really trying to make sure I have my own interest in mind and not comparing myself to them. That's falling into that trap in comparison to them is something that I struggle with mightily. And they probably don't even know that about me. But I think it's something that is when you're the baby of the family. I think it's something that's just natural, and I've really got to fight that, because that's I think
I
when
don't
I've
think
gotten
it's just a
myself into
baby of the
trouble-
family. I think that's
Just
everybody,
all
man.
of-
I'm the
yeah.
middle of 7, man, and I think that everybody has to look around and be like, you know, I've heard it once said that the comparison that most people make to that determines their self-esteem is how are you doing compared to your brother-in-laws, which I think is an interesting one, right? Because it says, all right, we all married into the same family, so we're at some level, but we came from different angles. How am I doing relative to this other person? And it's an interesting idea because with your siblings, maybe it's not such a terrible thing to do some comparison, particularly if you view them as successful, right? Like maybe the idea that like there are things to admire that are there, and as long as it doesn't become resentful, that's probably okay.
Yeah, and I think that's where that's the key there, is not being resentful. And I don't know if I've ever made it be resentful, but sometimes I find myself chasing after the wrong things. I don't want to get into, because out of respect for my family, I don't want to get into too many particulars there. But there's this line that, funny enough, Jimmy Buffett said it, and I've used it so much in my life. I probably heard it 20 years ago, where he was talking about comparing himself with Eric Clapton and how he wished he could play the guitar like Eric Clapton. And he kind of had that frame of mind for a long time, in that he would never measure up to Eric Clapton as how great of a guitar player he was. But then it kind of hit him one day, and it's like, I bet Eric Clapton wishes he could throw a fishing rod like Jimmy Buffett can. So I mean, comparison is all relative. We're all great at something, and we all have that thing that, we may not understand how great we may be at that. And somebody may wish that they were as great as something as we are. We just don't understand that or realize that sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and when you bring it up as a demon, I'm sitting here thinking, well, that's not my direct demon. I can see where it comes from, but my demons are, totally different vices. But it's interesting that that's the one you picked up on. I'm glad you shared that. That's a good thing to think about.
Yeah, it is. There's some heavy stuff with that. And I guess out of respect to my family, I don't want to share that, but yeah, it's something that's gnawed on me for a lot of times, but I've really come to peace with it now. And
so, when we wrap up here, when you think about the direction your podcast is heading in, you've done dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews. Where's it going?
It's going to a place, and I hit on this a little bit earlier, where it's, there's still going to be a focus on mental health, because I think it's important, and it's important to have good, meaningful conversations, not just the woe is me type conversations, the real solutions, what people did to get through them. But I'm really interested in focusing on health as a holistic topic, and talking more about physical health and as it relates to mental health. So this coming January, I am talking to nothing but dietitians about how the food we eat affects our body and affects our mood, and how by changing up how we feed our body, how that feeds our brain. And my big thing is also, and I want to talk to each one of them about how us as livestock producers can help understand that the meat that we provide, the meat that comes from the cattle, I'm talking about cattle just because that's what I know, but how that is part of a healthy diet, and how that can help people be healthy as well. Because there's, as you know, there's a misconception about that run abound.
I'm with you on the part about the misconceptions. I have my doubts about the value of dietitians.
Really?
Yeah. I think there are some out there. I know people that are dietitians that work from like cancer diets, for like, hey, we know this medication interacts with these foods, and so or you have to be on this sort of a diet. But I think there's so little known about human nutrition because it's biochemistry built on physics, built on chemistry, built on like all these layers of abstraction that to me dietitians are overvalued in our society.
Really? You think so? Okay. That's interesting. Well, we'll see. Right.
There you go.
But I mean, and then I think there's a definite point where I'm going to talk about exercise, because that's been, and I'll tell anybody this, the thing that's helped me the most is making sure I get enough exercise. I run or lift weights at least 5 to 8 times a week. And I mean, man, that's really made a change. And
when did you start running?
2019.
And how did it go when you started?
Freaking terrible for a week or a month or so. It was awful. I hated every second of it for a month. But my wife wanted me, and this is weird. It's funny because I listened to your podcast with the running coach today and talked about how you should progress. And I was listening to that while I was running this morning and thought, I probably could have used this last year because I progressed way too fast. I went from running 0 to running a half marathon. And I started running in January 1 and I ran a half marathon the end of April. Yeah, it was way too fast. And I had, foot injuries. It was a hard road, and I pushed myself probably harder than I should have, but I'm glad I did it. I've just kept it up since then. I actually ran my second half marathon this past weekend on Halloween. It was just one that my wife and I and my nephew ran together. It was just the three of us. And it was really a cool thing that we were able to, I know you and I have talked about David Goggins a lot, and we had all kind of read that book right before we did the half marathon, and we talked about it, and that helped push us through those last few miles and when it was really getting tough. And, I'm at my goal for this year. It was 1,000 miles, and I am at 891 right now.
Wow, man. Yeah. That is, wow. I've done 500. I've never done 1,000. That's amazing. There's been some time, like I was doing really well, and then I got sick in March, and I didn't run for like 2 weeks. And I thought, man, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I'm never going to catch back up now, because I calculated that I had to run 2.74 miles each day on average to make it to 1,000 miles for the year. And I got really behind there for a few months, really. And I caught back up, I think, in October. And now I'm ahead of schedule now. I mean, that's one of the best parts about having those big goals, where if you really keep up with it, all that time that you had to do to catch up with the time you'd lost, now all of a sudden becomes a victory you get to stack on there. So it's even better than where you were before you got sick.
And and the thing about big goals are, what if I really try for it? What if I really do my best and I fail and I don't get to 1,000 miles? Well, I still ran 995 or 950 or whatever. That's pretty damn good too. That's why we have to make sure that we are always pushing ourselves on goals, because we never know the really potential that we have for ourselves.
Yeah. And I think goals, one of the things I've learned about it is writing them down is what matters, right?
Yep.
Like there were a lot of times when I would say in my mind, I'm going to do this thing. And then the next day would roll around and be like, well, I mean, I'm not really starting it yet. But when you write it down, that's like, I don't know, something far more serious with your psyche they're going on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Writing them down and holding yourself accountable, that's the big thing too.
Well, speaking of holding accountable, I have got to get to bed because I'll be up at 3 a.m. with the baby. But man, Jason, this has been fantastic.
It's been great. I can't believe it's been this long already. Time flies, man.
It was great chatting with you, and it has been a great pleasure to have you in the Articulate Ventures Network, man. I'm really glad you joined.
Yes, sir. Well, thanks for having me, Vance, and thanks for your podcast. It's a huge influence on my life.